Only if the mother's promise is kept. Listen, come closer to the fire, let the night cover your shoulders like a shawl. What I am about to tell you is not only a story, it is a warning wrapped in memory, a truth dressed in the clothes of the past. There is a saying among the elders of Idukwi village, that the words spoken by a dying mother do not merely leave her lips, they enter the bones of the earth itself. They press deep into the roots of trees, into the current of rivers, into the wings of the owl that watches from the rafters when men sleep. A mother's final word is not breath. It is the law. And so, it was in the village of Amara, nestled between the great Aji River and the old forest the people called Iguioka, the sky forest, where the ancestors had agreed, long ago, to stay. There was a promise made in that village. A promise sealed with tears and with the last flicker of a woman's eyes. And when that promise was broken, when one hand, greedy and impatient, tore at the thread that held the family together, the land itself remembered. The river remembered. The ancestors, who had been watching quietly, patient as stones in still water, finally turned their faces away. This is the story of the Okafor family. And I tell it to you tonight so that you will understand. A mother's promise is not merely a request. It is the architecture of a family's fate. In the village of Amara, no compound was more respected than the Okafor homestead. It sat on 3 generous acres at the meeting point of 2 old footpaths, the one leading to the market and the one leading to the river. In the dry season, the smell of roasting yam rose from the courtyard. In the rains, the breadfruit tree near the gate turned fat and low with fruit, and the children of the village knew they were always welcome there. The woman who kept that compound was called Chidima Okafor, Mama Chidima to everyone who knew her. She was a woman whose eyes held both laughter and iron. She had planted every tree on that land with her own hands. She had dug the first seedbed the year after her husband, Emmanuel Okafor, was laid beneath the red earth, when her oldest child was barely 12 years old and the youngest was still nursing at her breast. Emmanuel had been a farmer and a dreamer, a man who spoke of the family land the way other men spoke of their firstborn sons. He told Chidima once, pressing her hand to the earth as the sun fell behind the treeline, that the land was not theirs to own, but theirs to hold. We are caretakers, he said, of what our fathers gave us so that our children may give it forward. Then he laughed, because he was also a man who liked to laugh. He died of a fever in the 4th year of their marriage, and Chidima held his words in her chest like embers she refused to let go cold. She raised 4 children on that land, Ibuka, the firstborn son, broad-shouldered and proud, who had inherited his father's love of farming and his mother's stubborn loyalty. Then Adiz, the oldest daughter, gentle-spirited and perceptive, who could read the mood of a room the way a farmer reads clouds. Then Chukwamika, called Emeka, the third, who had grown up clever and restless, whose eyes moved faster than his patience. And finally, little Neka, the last, the quiet one, who sat near her mother longer than the others and memorized her words without meaning to. Chidima asked nothing of the world but peace, a good harvest, and the sight of her children eating together from the same pot. For many years, she had all 3. The illness came in the long dry season, when the dust turned the evening sky the color of old copper. Chidima had been coughing since the rains ended, and the village herbalist, Nwan, had come 3 times with bark and roots that helped for a while. But the 4th time she came, she said nothing, only held Chidima's hand and looked at Ibuka with eyes that said what mouths cannot always say. On the 9th night, when the moon was full and the frogs along the Aji River were singing their ancient songs, Chidima asked all 4 of her children to come into her room and close the door. They gathered around her. Ibuka at her right side, Adiz holding her hand, Emeka standing near the window with his jaw tight, and Nneka at the foot of the bed, her knees folded beneath her. The oil lamp threw their shadows long against the wall. "My children," Mama Chidima began, and her voice was quieter than they had ever heard it, but also somehow clearer, the way water becomes clearer as it deepens. "I have carried this family on this land for 23 years. I have not complained. I have not asked the earth for mercy. I have only asked that it give us what we earn with our hands, and it has." She paused. Her breath moved like something being carefully rationed. "But I am going soon. I can feel the door opening. I am not afraid. Your father is on the other side, and he has been waiting a long time." A faint smile crossed her face, then was gone. "But before I go, I must ask you to swear to me. Not only in your mouths. In your hearts, in your blood, in the name of your father who loved this land more than he loved himself." She asked them each to place one hand on the earth, not on the bed, not on the wall, but on the bare soil just inside the doorway, where the threshold met the ground. And there, with their hands pressed into the cool red earth and the moon watching through the window, Chidima Okafor made her children swear 3 things. First, the family compound and its farmland would never be sold. Not to a stranger. Not to a neighbor. Not for money, not for debt, not for ambition. The land was to be held and passed forward. Second, every harvest season, before the family stored or sold even a single yam, one portion of the crop would be shared freely with the poorest families in the village. This was not charity, Chidima was firm on this, it was covenant. "The earth gives to those who give," she said. Third, as long as the great Aji tree at the center of the compound stood, the one Emmanuel himself had planted as a young man, no hand from within the family was to cut it, damage it, or allow harm to come to it. It was the spirit anchor of the homestead. The ancestors rested in its branches. One by one, her children spoke their vow aloud. Even Emeka, though he spoke a half-breath faster than the others, as if impatient to have the ceremony finished. Chidima closed her eyes. "Remember," she whispered. "The family will prosper only if the promise is kept. The moment it is broken, even once, the door between us and the ancestors will begin to close. And I will be on the other side of it, and I will not be able to help you." She died 3 nights later, on a Tuesday before dawn, so quietly that Nneka, who had been sleeping beside her, did not know until the morning birds began. For 8 years after Mama Chidima's burial, the promise held. And the land rewarded it. The harvests at the Okafor compound grew generous and reliable. The yam mounds yielded more than neighboring farms. The cassava came up fat. The breadfruit tree near the gate barely needed tending. The village said this was Chidima's blessing working through the soil, her spirit adding something the rains alone could not account for. Every harvest season without fail, Ibuka organized the sharing. He would stand at the compound gate with Adiz, and the 2 of them would carry baskets of yam, maize, and dried fish to the homes of the widows, the sick, and the families whose rains had been unkind. The village grew accustomed to this gift and loved the Okafors for it. Little Nneka became the keeper of the Aji tree. She watered its roots in the dry months, cleared away vines that tried to strangle its lower branches, and on the anniversary of her mother's death each year, she sat beneath it and spoke quietly, words only she and the tree could hear. Emeka, however, had changed. He had always been the restless one, the one whose eyes moved faster than his patience. By his mid-30s he had begun traveling to the city regularly, first once a month, then every few weeks. He dressed differently now. He came home in clean shoes and spoke of investments, of land values, of a developer from the capital who was looking to buy farmland in the district to build a processing factory. He never spoke of it directly. Not yet. He smiled at the dinner table and laughed with Ibuka and helped in the farm when he was home. But Adiz noticed things. She noticed the way Emeka's eyes measured the acreage when he walked through it. The way he studied the Aji tree not with affection, but with the focused gaze of a man calculating whether something is in his way. She said nothing. She told herself she was wrong. That he was their brother. That the promise had been spoken with his lips pressed to the same earth as theirs. She was not wrong. It came in the 12th year after Chidinma's death, in the second month of a dry season that had already begun badly. There had been less rain than usual, and though the Okafor farm had managed better than most, the soil still carried something deeper than moisture. Emeka used the dry season as the opening for his argument. He arrived home one Friday evening and asked them all to sit together. He was calm, almost rehearsed, and he laid papers on the table the way a trader lays out goods he intends to sell. "This is an offer," he said, "from a real estate company based in Imo. They want the 2 back acres. Not the compound, just the farmland. And they want to remove the Aji tree because the new road they're planning will run through this side of the property. The offer is more money than our family has ever seen at one time. We could build new homes. Send every child in this family to school in the city. Start real businesses." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that carries weight, the way the air before a storm carries weight. Ibuka spoke first, and his voice was the ground after a long drought, cracked, deliberate. "You know what Mama made us promise." "Mama is gone," Emeka said. He did not say it cruelly. But he said it plainly. She was a good woman and she did what she thought was right. But she made that promise in a different time. We are not in that time anymore. The world has moved. We cannot live in a dead woman's instructions forever. Adiz pressed her hands flat on the table. "That dead woman raised you without a father on land she wept into. You pressed your hand into the earth of this compound and gave her your word with her last breath warming the room, Emeka. And now you call her instructions a thing to discard when they become inconvenient?" "I am not discarding her," Emeka said, and there was something in his voice now, a tightness, a defense, that suggested he had expected this and had prepared for it but had not quite prepared enough. "I am trying to help this family grow. Is that not what any reasonable son would do?" But Nneka, who was sitting near the window and had not said a word, stood up then. Her voice was very quiet. "You cannot cut Mama's tree, Emeka. You cannot." And she walked out. The argument continued for 3 more days. Emeka returned to the city on the 4th. The matter seemed, for the time being, to have been set aside. It was not set aside. It was only moved underground. The way fire moves before it finds the surface. 6 weeks later, Ibuka woke one morning to find that a section of the back fence had been quietly removed. The same morning, a surveyor's marker, a small red-tipped stake, had appeared near the base of the Aji tree. Emeka had not intended to move without telling them. Or perhaps he had always intended exactly that, and the plan to tell them had been a courtesy he told himself he was extending, a story he used to sleep at night. On a Tuesday, always a Tuesday in Amara, the elders say, when the boundary between the seen and unseen world is thinnest, the workers arrived in the early hours before dawn. Emeka had been paid by the developer to manage the preliminary clearance. The contract had been signed without the other siblings. He had forged Ibuka's signature. He had convinced himself it was temporary, that once the money came, once the family saw what it meant, they would understand. They would forgive. The Aji tree came down before sunrise. It took 4 men with machetes and a chainsaw the developer's crew had brought from the city. The tree resisted in the way old trees resist, slowly, heavily, as though not quite willing to believe what was happening to it. When the last root was severed and the great trunk tilted and fell, the sound it made was not the crashing sound the workers expected. It was lower. Deeper. As though the earth itself had cried out from somewhere beneath the surface. Neka heard it from inside the house and sat up in the dark with both hands pressed to her chest before she knew why. By the time the morning light came and the compound woke, the tree was gone. In its place was a raw stump the color of exposed bone, surrounded by scattered sawdust and the small clay figures Neka had placed at its roots over the years, her offerings to the ancestors, now overturned in the dirt. Ibuka stood at the edge of the stump for a long time and said nothing. His silence was more frightening to Adiz than any shouting would have been. Neka knelt down and began to gather the overturned offerings with both hands, quietly, the way one gathers the belongings of the dead. It did not happen all at once. The consequences moved in the way grief moves, not in one wave that breaks and recedes, but in a slow tide that rises a little each day until you realize the floor is wet and has been for some time. The first sign came in the rains. The rainy season arrived on its usual week, as the villagers counted it, but at the Okafor compound, the rains fell strangely, sideways, as though reluctant to touch the ground. The yam mounds that had always been the best in the village began to show rot at the base. The cassava leaves curled inward. The fruit on the breadfruit tree fell before it ripened, hard and green, thudding onto the earth like small knocks on a closed door. Then the animals began to behave oddly. The family goat. A steady, untroubled animal named for Chittima's favorite color, stopped eating and stood each evening facing the stump where the Aji tree had been, head slightly lowered, unmoving, for hours. The compound dogs howled in the middle of the night for no visible reason. A large gray bird that none of them had ever seen before came and perched on the roof of the main house for 7 days in a row, and no amount of shooing moved it. Then the dreams began. Ibuka dreamed of his mother standing at the edge of a river, her back to him, calling his name in a voice he could hear but not reach. He woke drenched in sweat and lay listening to the night sounds until the roosters announced the morning. Adiz dreamed of the Aji tree, alive, enormous, its canopy spreading overhead like a second sky, and beneath it, their father and mother sitting side by side, looking not at her but past her, at something behind her that she could not see. When she turned to look, she woke up. Neka, who had always had the most open channel to the spiritual world in the family, did not dream at all. She said the dreams had stopped for her the night the tree was cut, and in place of dreams there was only a deep, wordless dark that pressed against her sleep like a hand over a mouth. The village noticed too. The families who had always received the harvest-sharing gift came in the 3rd week of the season and waited at the compound gate, as they had for 12 years. No one came out. No baskets were brought. The compound was quiet as a held breath. An old woman named Mama Azinwa, who lived next to the palm wine tapper at the end of the village road and was widely understood to see more than she let on, passed by the compound one evening and stopped at the gate. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the stump of the Aji tree in the fading light. Then she shook her head, made a sound deep in her throat, and walked on without a word. It was Neka who finally went to Mama Azinwa. She went alone, early in the morning, before Ibuka or Adiz were awake. She carried a small wrapped cloth of kola nut and palm wine, as respect required, and she walked the path to the old woman's house while the dew was still on the grass and the village was still dreaming. Mama Azinwa opened the door before Nneka knocked. They sat together for a long time before either of them spoke. Then the old woman said, "You already know." "Tell me what I do not know," Nneka said. Mama Azinwa brought out her divination bowl and her cowrie shells and her white chalk, and she worked in silence for several minutes, her lips moving without sound, her eyes seeing distances the room did not contain. Then she sat back. "The spirits of your lineage have been patient people," she said. "They waited while your mother made the promise. They entered the promise and made it binding. Not binding in the way of men's laws, which can be argued and overturned, but in the way of the covenant between the living and the dead, which has no court of appeal. Your mother did not simply ask a favor of her children. She translated the wishes of your ancestors into living breath, into law, into the architecture of your family's prosperity." She paused, pouring water from a clay pot and watching where it pooled. When the tree fell, the door opened. Not a door between rooms. A door between worlds. The ancestors do not come through it in anger. They are not a punishing people. But their protection is conditional. They are like a river. If you build a dam against them, the water does not curse you. It simply finds another way. And your fields begin to thirst. Nneka asked the question she had been afraid to ask since the morning the tree fell. "Is it too late?" Mama Azinwa was quiet for a moment that felt like a season. "The door is not yet closed," she said. "But it is closing. The window in which your family can truly act, is not wide. The one who broke the promise must return and acknowledge it. Not merely apologize. He must restore what can be restored, and stand in the place of the broken oath and speak it again with the full weight of knowing what he chose to abandon. A new tree must be planted from the seed of the old one, if any remain. And the covenant of the harvest sharing must be fulfilled, not next season, now." She looked at Nneka directly for the first time since the divination began. "The hardest part," the old woman said, "is that your brother must be the one who chooses. You cannot drag a man back to his honor. You can only show him where he dropped it." Adiz went to the city to find Emeka. She did not write. She did not send a message ahead. She appeared at the door of his city apartment on a Thursday afternoon, and Emeka opened it and saw her face and knew immediately that whatever conversation was coming could not be avoided with money or words or plans. She did not argue. She sat across from him at his table and told him what Mama Azinwa had said. She told him about the failing crops. About the dreams. About Nneka's silence in the nights. She told him that the developer's money was already partly spent and could not be returned in full, and she was not asking about the money. She was asking about the brother she grew up with. The one who had pressed his hand into the same earth as hers and given his mother their collective word. "You left something behind when you made that choice," she said. "Not just a promise. Part of yourself. You know this. I can see that you know this, Emeka. I can see it in how you have not slept properly. In how you do not speak of the compound the way you used to." She was right. He had not slept well since the tree fell. He came home on Saturday. They met at the stump by moonlight, all four of them, as they had once been around their mother's bed. The compound was very quiet. Even the frogs along the river seemed to have withdrawn a little, leaving the night with an unusual, watchful stillness. Emeka stood at the edge of the stump for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was not the voice of the man who had laid contracts on the table. It was the voice of a younger man. A boy, almost. I told myself I was doing it for us, he said. But I know what I was doing it for. I wanted what other men had. I was tired of being the clever one who still walked on red earth while men younger than me rode in cars. I was ashamed of what I thought was poverty. And I used the family to pay for my shame. The silence that followed this was different from all the silences that had come before it. It was clean, somehow. The kind of silence that comes after a wound is properly opened. Neka was already kneeling at the stump, both hands pressed against it. She looked up at Emeka and nodded once. Ibuka crossed the space between them. He did not embrace his brother, not yet. He simply placed his hand on Emeka's shoulder and kept it there. It was enough. Adiz brought the kola nut and the small clay pot of palm wine that Mama Azinwa had sent them home with. She broke the kola as her mother had always broken it, with both hands, over the stump of the tree, speaking the names of the ancestors quietly, as a man wades into deep water, steadily, without panic, until the bottom is found. Mama Azinwa had kept, in a small clay pot in her back room, the seeds of a dozen old aji trees. The kind of work that old spiritual keepers do, preserving things for futures they will not see but know are coming. She gave Neka 3 seeds from the aji tree that had stood in the Okafor compound, collected quietly in the days after the cutting when no one else had thought to look. On the first Sunday of the following week, before the morning service bells sounded from the small white chapel near the market, the 4 Okafor siblings gathered again at the stump. Emeka had soaked the seeds for 2 days as Mama Azinwa instructed. He had kept them warm under a damp cloth at night, close to his chest, because the old woman had said the seed needed to know the warmth of the hands that owed it an apology. He planted it himself. He dug with his hands, not a tool, the old woman had been clear on this, and pressed the seed into the earth just east of the stump, where the morning light hit longest. When the seed was in the ground, he pressed both palms flat around it and was still for a moment. Then he repeated the promise. All 3 parts. His voice was different this time, not rehearsed, not fast. Weighted. Real. The others spoke it with him. Afterward, Adiz organized what the family had been unable to give at the beginning of the season. They gathered what remained of the harvest. It was smaller than any year before, yes, the drought had bitten, but they shared it anyway. Basket after basket, carried to the homes of the widows, the sick, the families who needed it most. And then something small happened, the kind of small thing that only those who are paying attention would notice. That afternoon, the first real rain of the season fell over the Okafor compound. Not sideways, as the reluctant rains had been coming. Straight down, heavy, generous, drumming on the thatched roof the way rain is supposed to sound. The children of the village ran out into the street and lifted their faces to it and laughed. Neka stood under it with her arms open. It took 6 months for the new sapling to push its first branches skyward. And in that season, the harvest was not extraordinary, the earth was still healing, as Mama Azinwa reminded them when they visited to give thanks. Repair is not instant, she said. The ancestors are not theatrical. They restore the way a wound restores. From the inside out, slowly, without announcement. But there was peace in the compound. Real peace, the kind that is not merely the absence of argument but the presence of something harder to name. A rightness. A belonging. Emeka came home more often now. He sold the city apartment. He found work that did not require him to be ashamed of the ground beneath his feet. He learned, in the fullness of time, that the things his brother and sisters had been tending all those years were not poverty, they were wealth of a kind that no developer's contract had ever been designed to measure. And so, children, you have heard. You have heard what happens when a family forgets that its roots go deeper than its ambitions. You have heard what happens when one hand pulls against the weaving, and how the whole cloth shudders and begins to unravel. You have heard, too, that the ancestors are patient, that they do not punish so much as they withdraw, the way sunlight withdraws from a closed window. But hear this also, the story did not end in ruin, because someone knelt. That is the part that matters. That one man, proud, clever, ashamed of the wrong things, found the courage to kneel, not before his siblings, but before the truth. Before the earth his mother had loved. Before the memory of a woman who had pressed her dying breath into the making of a promise because she knew that families, like trees, must have roots to survive. The elders say, a mother's last word is the ground beneath the house. You may build upward as high as you like. You may paint the walls and change the roof and add rooms and fill them with the things of a new world. But the ground is the ground. Move it, ignore it, sell it out from under yourself. And the house, whatever it has become, will fall. Honor your parents. Not because they were perfect, no parent is perfect, no mother is a god, but because their words come from a place of love that has no strategy in it, no ambition, no calculation. Their words are simply what they most wished to leave behind. And when you receive a gift like that, wrapped in someone's last breath, you hold it carefully. You hold it the way you would hold the seed of a tree. Knowing that what is in your hands today will shade your children tomorrow. Keep your promises. Not only the ones made to the living, but the ones made to the earth. To the memory of those who made you. To the family you were given, which is, for all its complications, for all its amicas and its arguments over tables covered in contracts, the only family you will ever have. The fire is low now. The night is deep. Go and sleep well. But before you close your eyes, check. Is there a promise somewhere in your chest that you have been meaning to keep? Is there a tree you planted in someone's name that has been standing unvisited, unwatered, growing or dying in the silence of your forgetting? Go to it. In the morning, go to it. The ancestors are watching. And they are patient. But patience, like all things, has an end.